This is one of 3 locomotives that I'm going to be doing this review video on. And this video is pretty much going to be about a sound file comparison. But I'll briefly talk about the details of this engine. And if you looked at the last review video that I did on the ABA F3 O-scale locomotive set, you see that I briefly did an introduction or had this one pass by in that video very briefly, just so people could get a look at what was coming down the pipeline. And what we're looking at here is a MTH Premier Line O-scale P42 Amtrak Genesis locomotive. Now the other 2 locomotives that I will be doing a sound file comparison on are both Amtrak Genesis locomotives from an HO scale, both made by Kato. And pretty much like I said, what I'm going to be doing a sound file comparison. But allow me to briefly talk about some of the details of this engine. And pretty much what we're looking at here is it comes with the normal detailing that you would expect from MTH. Operational headlights, operating ditch lights that isolate from both sides whenever you blow the horn, lit number boards, operational marker lights, lit interior, and cab figures on each end. Of course, you got your mirrors here, your operational couplers, and we already know all the details, but I'll show you better than I can tell you. Okay, up top, we have the antennas, the 5-chime horn, and a bunch of other detail, which I don't exactly know what it is. We have the smoke unit, which I gotta wipe that down a little better. And we also have the see-through fan. Along the side, we have see-through vents. We have resuscitated grab irons. The doors don't open up on this engine for whatever reason though. We have the inside cab figure, like I mentioned. I don't know if you can see them very well. I believe these are vents for the dynamic braking. You also have a great paint scheme. You have the radiator fans at the top and at the bottom. And also along the back, you have your reverse headlight and you also have your reverse marker lights. Toward the bottom, you got the trucks, the pilot's 2-axle trucks, 4 wheels, a bunch of other detailing that I'm not exactly sure of. You have your air compressor tank, the fuel tank located in this area here. And of course, once again, you got your radiator vents or whatever they are, ladders, and the doors here, which they don't open once again for whatever reason on this engine. In addition to that, you also have 4 passenger cars, 3 coaches, and 1 luggage car, which this is currently right here, the doors pushing on that one. As you can see on the inside of the cars, they're lit. They have interior seating. You also have figures on the inside as well. The doors, which open. And at the caboose car, you have marker lights, as you can see right there. Now what I'll briefly do is I'll run through some of the sound file functions and the lighting functions. But before I get into that, what I want to do is talk about some of the likes and dislikes about this engine. Now, as far as its physical appearance, I have absolutely no problem with it. I believe it's a beautiful looking engine. It runs, as far as its performance, push-pull, it runs great. I have no complaints there either. The only complaint that I do have as far as lighting features are concerned is when you have your lit number boards on, it bleeds inside of the cab, and I'll demonstrate that later on in the video. The next thing that I have a problem with is the sounds of the prime mover and the sounds of the startup and shutdown sequence, which is completely inaccurate. And the thing that bothers me just a little bit is, if you're spending $400 on an engine, you would expect MTH to put in accurate sound files, because it sounds nothing like a P42 Genesis. If you've actually been around a P42 Genesis, you know exactly what I mean. You know exactly how it's supposed to sound. It has a distinctive prime mover sound file, which this does not replicate that at all. And the one thing that I will say is, it's one thing to make mistakes on 100% accuracy when it comes down to details of the locomotive and how it's supposed to look, because there's certain things that might be overlooked or that simply weren't seen. But the one thing that I think is unacceptable is you're spending $400 or $500 for an engine and they can't even get an accurate sound file, because that, in my opinion, is one of the easiest things that they can actually get, because all you have to do is go up to the actual locomotive itself and record it while it's in operation. I mean, it's pretty damn simple. I mean, they have a boatload of these locomotives that run all over the country. Here in my city, they have P42 Genesis locomotives that run for Metro North. Amtrak runs these all over the country, including New York City, state, and even in certain parts of Canada. So there's really no excuse, in my opinion, for them to not get an accurate sound file that matches the actual engine. And also what I do notice about MTH locomotives and their sound files, and this is the one thing that when it comes down to Loksound and even Tsunami sound, even though I don't think Tsunami is all that accurate, is that they have a sound or distinctive sound for dynamic braking and radiator fans, which is something that I've yet to see in any of these MTH locomotives. Now, if I'm doing something wrong or if I'm not activating a certain function, you can feel free to let me know, but I just haven't seen it in any of the MTH videos that I've looked at or in any of these MTH engines that I have purchased. I've never heard of a dynamic brake sound or a fan, and I've never heard of a radiator fan or a HEP engine, because we all know that passenger locomotives are supposed to have a HEP engine for additional power for the cars or whatever the case is. And for whatever reason, this doesn't seem to have that. So, I mean, once again, so what I'll do is I'll briefly run through some of the lighting functions, passenger announcements, which I don't really care for because they don't sound accurate, but I'll go ahead and play them anyway. And I'll also go through the bell, horn, and then what I'll do is I'll notch the engine from notch 1 to 8, and then I'll bring it back down, and then I'll pull the engine out. So for this part of the video, I've decided to bring my camcorder directly in front of the locomotive. And what I'll do is I'll start it up so you can get a look at the lighting features that I'm talking about. See if I can lower the volume down just a bit so I can talk over it. Alright, you're looking directly into the main headlight. And what I'll do is I'll show you the lit number board. And this is what happens. Right now you're looking at the cab, which the cab interior lighting is off. The lit number board is off. I'll light it right now, and then you can see as you light the lit number board that it bleeds into the cab. Let me see if I can zoom in just a bit so people can get a closer look. So with the lit number boards on, it actually bleeds into the cab, which MTH didn't do the same job that it did for the F3 locomotives. But I'll keep the lit number boards lit for now. I'll light up the marker lights, which that's very accurate. They did a good job on this one, because usually they put green marker lights on the locomotives, on the front end of the locomotives, and that's inaccurate. It's supposed to be red, so I'll give them credit. They did red marker lights on the front and back. I mean, there's not really much of a reason for to show the back because it's pretty much the same thing. And what I'll do is I'll briefly turn on the ditch lights, which only come on whenever you have the engine in movement. If the engine's in still, it's not going to come on. Now, if I was going forward, of course these marker lights would have to be off. But since I'm demonstrating the whole thing at once, I'm just going to keep them on. Now, I believe, let me go to lit interior for a second. That's the cab with the lit interior. So either way, it's still lit. It's just a lot brighter when you have the lit interior on. Now what I'll do is I'll increase the volume and I'll play the bell sound. I'll blow the horn. When you blow the horn, the ditch lights oscillate. So I'll demonstrate the ditch lights oscillating while I have the horn blowing. And I'll go through the horn features as far as the forward, reverse, and railroad crossing. In my opinion, the horn itself, the horn and the bell are the two most impressive features as far as sound file is concerned. I don't know if the bell is 100% accurate for this locomotive, but it's a very crisp sounding bell. It has a good ring to it, and even if it isn't, I still think it's a good look. But let me go ahead and increase the volume and play these sound features. And I'll start with the bell first. Now I'll briefly do the short horn. Now I'll go to forward and reverse. And this one here is my personal favorite when you hit it manually.
Okay, ready to pull out.
And now I'll do the railroad crossing. Bring the volume down for just a second. For whatever reason, the railroad crossing, when you play that sequence, the horn sound seems to sound a little lower than it would if it was if you just did it regular manually or played any of the other features. But what I'll do also is I'll show you the oscillating ditch lights when you blow the horn. Alright, so now that that's out of the way, what I'll do is I'll briefly run through the prime mover sound, which once again is completely inaccurate, but I'll let people more or less hear what it is and why I believe it's completely inaccurate and why MTH gets 2 thumbs downs for that one. And I'll go from notch 1 to notch 8, and then I'll bring it back down. Alright, that's the engine at full throttle at notch 8. Once again, like I said, it sounds completely inaccurate. It's the wrong sound file for this locomotive, but I mean, I just wanted to get my point across. So now what I'll do is I'll bring it all the way back down manually. I'll play the shutdown sequence and then I'll pull it out for you. Then I'm going to move on to the HO scale. And that's the shutdown sequence, which once again it's way too fast. It's completely inaccurate, but you know, I just wanted to let people see it and hear it for themselves. And now what I'll do is I'll pull the engine out and I'll do a couple of quick run-bys of this locomotive, and then I'm going to move on to the HO scale Tsunami sound decoder and the Loksound decoder. Then I'll give you my opinion on which one I think is the best. that's the shutdown sequence. I mean, do you see how crappy that is and just downplayed it is? I mean, no disrespect to the engines, but I mean that's just terrible. I mean, no engine, no diesel locomotive shuts down like that. But anyway, let me get on to the next thing. All right, now I direct your attention to my HO scale engines. Can't really say it's a layout because I kind of disassembled the tracks to do some preparations for some different things I want to do in the future. Anyhow, just to give people a heads up, if you took a look at the videos that I did back in 2012, these are some videos I made some years ago on the HO scale engines that I had at that time and still have to this day. You notice that all of those locomotives pretty much came with no sound. So little by little, what I've been doing is I've been trying to step it up and purchase engines that come with equipped with either Tsunami sound decoders or Loksound decoders. Now this is a Tsunami P42 Amtrak Genesis, road number 161. I'll see if I can zoom in on that for a second. There you go. Now I also have another one or two more like this, another one with the same number, except that one doesn't come with any sound decoder or any sound at all. And then I have another one which is road number 68, which I'll display that in a little while, that has a Loksound decoder. But briefly, I'll give a quick tour of this engine. You can see some of the details. It doesn't have the cab figures on the inside or the mirrors along the side of it. The vents are resuscitated pretty well, even though they're not see-through vents. You have the 5-chime horn and the radiator fan, but you know, you have the molded fan in there. It's not the actual radiator radiator fan that you'll see, even though they did do a pretty good job molding it in there. Marker lights, ditch lights, headlights, the same thing that you pretty much find on the MTH version. But pretty much what I'm going to be doing, this is a sound comparison. Now, the one thing I've noticed with Tsunami, and I'll say this much, out of all three, my favorite is the Loksound version. But Tsunami is not that bad. This has a couple of functions to it, a couple of features. I just believe that when it comes down to Loksound has more features, better functions, and just better operation. So what I'll do is I'll start the engine up. I'll play a couple of the sounds. I'll let you listen to the dynamic brake fan and what I'll have to do is I'll notch the engine up. But unfortunately, I can't do that manually, so I'm going to have to hold it to keep the engine from moving all over the track. So let me start this thing up really fast. Now, I don't know if you can hear that little humming sound in the background, but that's the sound of the radiator fan, which is not an accurate fan for this locomotive, but I guess it doesn't sound too bad. I'll play the dynamic brake sound or the dynamic brake fan. Now, if you listen to that, my personal opinion on that, I don't care for the way it sounds. It just sounds like a generic, made-up sound that they threw in there. But I guess I will give Tsunami some credit for actually putting that sound file in there. Let me go ahead and start up the lights. So we have the headlights on. Let me see if I can put it in reverse so the ditch lights come on with the marker lights. I think I gotta press on the buttons to get it on. Let me see. Let me get these ditch lights going. There we go. Bring it back and forward. I believe there's something to dim and brighten the lights. Okay, yep, F7 is to dim and brighten the lights. So let me briefly try to run through some of the sound file functions. I've also picked up a different controller, a digital controller. It's not wireless, even though I will be eventually upgrading and going to wireless. And even though I have this on this set of track, even though it's not a layout because I disassembled the last HO scale track I had, because I'm actually doing some different things trying to set up for future videos. But let me just briefly run through some of the sound functions. So F1 is for the bell. which the bell's not bad. I believe the Tsunami sound, the Loksound has a much better sounding bell. F2 is for the horn. F3 is for the short horn. F4 is for the dynamic brake fan, which I played that, and that's pretty much what you get out of that, which I don't care for that, but hey, I guess I'll give him some kind of credit. F5, let me see. I'm not sure what F5 does. F6. I'm not sure what that does either. F7 is for brighten or dimming the lights like I showed earlier. F8 is to mute the sound. And F9, I'm not too sure what that does. F11, I guess that's some kind of air release. F10, don't really know what that does. F12, I guess it's the sound of a couple of sounds. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to have to put my hand here, hold the engine, and I will manually notch it up because, like I said, it will run all over the place if I do it the other way. So I'm going to hold it and I'm going to just play it. I didn't notch it up all the way because I don't want to put too much stress on the motor, on this engine. I believe this engine has motors located directly, or that each truck itself is a motor in itself, so it has two motors on each truck, or not on each truck, but it has a motor per truck, I should say. And that's some of the features with this one. Now, like I said before, this is not my favorite sounding engine. It sounds more accurate than the MTH. But it's still not 100% accurate, but I guess I will give Tsunami credit for doing a better job than what MTH did. So with that being said, I'm going to do is I'm going to shut this down. And what I'll do is I'll prepare to bring in my Loksound Dakota P42 MTH engine. So I'll direct your attention to that in a second. And now I'll direct your attention to my Kato P42 Genesis locomotive with a Loksound Dakota. This one goes off of road number 68. Now, as far as detail and physical appearance, this has the same exact physical detailing that the Tsunami version has, except this one has a different decoder. Now, as far as physical appearance in comparison, which do I think looks the most accurate out of the Loksound, Tsunami, and MTH, which you both know that Tsunami and Loksound are both, these are both Kato locomotives, so they pretty much have the same detail, or they have the exact same detail. But I'll say that MTH has a bit more accurate detail as far as having like see-through vents and fan blades and whatnot. But other than that, they're pretty much close to the same. Or we all know that MTH has the mirrors that stick out to the side, or whatever the case. So this one doesn't necessarily have that, but once again, it's not a deal breaker. However, as far as which is my favorite far as sound file functions out of MTH, Tsunami, and Loksound, I'm definitely going to have to go and put my money on Loksound. Tsunami is pretty good, but there's some sound files that it's not exactly accurate for this type of locomotive. MTH, although they did get a couple of sounds accurate as far as the bell and the horn, which they did a real good job on that, the prime mover is completely inaccurate. It sounds completely terrible. It doesn't sound nothing like the prototype. And if you stood in front of one of these locomotives before, then you know exactly how this locomotive is supposed to sound. So what I'll do is I'm going to run through some of the sound functions. Some of them I'm going to do while I have the prime mover sounds off, just so you can hear them better. And then some of them I have no choice but to actually rev up the prime mover before I can actually play those sound files. So without further ado, let me do that right now. F1, which is the bell, which is a nice, crisp, clear, accurate sounding bell. F2 is a horn and bell. which I must say, just for a side note, the bell comes on automatically whenever you press the horn. F3, that is the sound of the, I guess it's the coupling, the uncoupling and coupling of the couplers. F4 is a sound function I will not be able to operate right now because that is the sound of the dynamic brake fans, which that only operates when the engine is in motion. F5 is another one that's the HEP rev, which I'll do that once I actually turn on the sound file functions. F6, or better yet, the prime mover, F6, not too sure what that does. F7 is the railroad crossing. F8 is to actually start up the prime mover, and F9 is for manual notching. Now, what I did want to mention really fast is this also has a radiator fan sound file. Now, the radiator fan sound file is not accurate for this specific locomotive. However, it is accurate for an SD45, an SD40-2, a F40PH, or a Jeep 40PH. But either way, they still decided to put that one in this type of locomotive, and it's a great sounding sound file. It's just not accurate for this engine, but it still sounds great to have this one or have that sound in this engine. And this is some of the things that I like about Loksound. And this is the one thing I've never noticed with MTH. Now, as far as playing the radiator fan sound file, that would be F11, but of course I can't actually play that sound file separately. I'll have to have the prime mover and have that operational before I can actually play those sound files. The next thing that I've noticed about that sound file is if you have the locomotive going at certain speeds or up to a certain speed, that fan comes on and off automatically without you even having to operate it. And in my opinion, that was very impressive when I looked at it. And that was something else that made me had to go out and purchase one of these locomotives. And I'm going to probably more than likely for my HO scale is stick to Loksound decoders because Loksound just sounds more accurate. Now, the one thing I've noticed about MTH, and I said this earlier, or I believe I did, is that a lot of their locomotives, or I've never heard a single one of their locomotives have a dynamic brake fan sound file or a radiator fan sound file. Now, these are locomotives that are much larger, in many different cases, 2 or 3 times bigger than one of these HO scale engines. They have much larger speakers. So, and what becomes a little disappointing is the fact that they have all of this stuff that they can get these sound files on, and it would have much more bass, it would have much more clarity, and it would just, if they took the time to actually detail their sound functions on their engines, it would actually be pretty impressive to actually run their locomotive. But once again, you know, in certain cases they get sound files very accurate, just they don't have certain things like dynamic brakes and radiator fans, which I believe that's a must whenever you are running HO scale or O scale locomotives with sound. They should just automatically have that, but for whatever reason they don't have that, and I just wish they would actually take the time to actually put that into their engines as far as sound files concerned. So without further ado, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually start up the engine sequence. What you can do is listen to the comparison, and what you'll notice from this one to MTH is that this one has a nice slow startup sequence, and then it goes gradually into idle mode, and then you can do the manual notching. MTH, on the other hand, like I showed before, you turn it on and it just starts up immediately, and it's completely inaccurate. But let me go ahead and just start this up right now, and that will be F8. And you can see how it has a nice slow startup that matches the prototype. Now, F0 is for the lights. F11, that is the radiator fan sound. which I must say that that's a very impressive sound file. Now, I believe that radiator fan sound file more or less works as a HEP engine for the SD40, the GP40-2 PH and the F40 PHs. F12 is for the brightness of the lights. And take a good look at that. I like the way it gradually gets brighter and gradually gets dimmer. That's very impressive as far as I'm concerned. At F9 you have, well, I'm skipping one, sorry about that. In this case, F5 is for the HEP rev, which I'll play that right now. So that's the sound of the HEP rev. As you can hear, it gets kind of loud. So what I'll do is I'll bring it back down to idle, which is the F5. And I like the way it just cuts out like that. It's just that's a beautiful sound. Now the next thing I'm gonna do is go to F9, which is the manual notching. Now, I don't know if I can get through every one individual one at a time because it becomes confusing trying to maneuver through this one. But I'll go through a couple of them and then I'll go to notch 8. So let me start with pressing the manual notching, which is F9. Let me try to bring it up again. Now I want people to listen deliberately to that notching. Now, like I said, when it comes down to MTH and the Loksound, this is exactly how an Amtrak P42 Genesis locomotive is supposed to sound. That is the exact accurate sound prime mover when you're notching it up. And this is not even all the way at full throttle just yet. But this is how they should have did this. Now, can you imagine if MTH would have took the time to put that sound file in their O-scale engines that have a much bigger speaker and can produce much more bass? But let me notch it up again. Now let me bring it all the way up to notch 8. Okay, there it is all the way at notch 8. As you can hear, it gets kind of loud, so I gotta actually talk real close into the microphone just so people can hear my voice over this sound. And F10 is to manually bring it back down, so I'll bring it back down to idle through F10. display the marker lighting really quickly by throwing it in reverse. As you can see, it has pretty nice marker lights. And now I'll let you listen to the shutdown sequence, which is F8. There's only one other sound file function that I could think of off the top of my head to let you listen to. And like I said, that's the dynamic brake fan sound. The only way I can actually play that is if I actually have the locomotive moving. So what I'll do is I'll pull it out of the station. Now, however, I don't have any Amtrak cars to go with this engine, so I have it linked up or latched up to my Ace train car, bi-level train car set and my Metrolink bi-level set. So what I'll do is I might do a couple of clips running this around the loop that I have really fast, and I'll pretty much close the video out with that.